Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Overcoming Depression and Anxiety, brought to you by Healthy Me Summits. I'm Joanna Rushton, your host, and we're being joined here today by Tiffany Cruikshank. Tiffany is an internationally acclaimed yoga teacher, author, and health and wellness expert. She's also the founder of Yoga Medicine, a community of expert yoga teachers focused on fusing the best of anatomy and Western medicine with the traditional practice of yoga. Known as a teacher's teacher, Tiffany has a master's degree in acupuncture and oriental medicine and is specializing in sports medicine and orthopedics. Tiffany, thank you so much for making the time to share your experiences and your knowledge and wisdom with us here today.
Thanks for having me.
So I think, just so that our audience can connect with you, I'm sure if there's those out there that are either yoga teachers or avid yoga practice people who practice yoga themselves, I'm sure they've probably come across your work. But for those that haven't and who perhaps so far in their life hasn't practiced yoga, can you just share a little bit about your background and what brought you to become the renowned teacher that you are?
Absolutely. So I started when I was about 14 years old, and for me, really, it was kind of a very different time in my life. I think really kind of getting comfortable in my body was such a big thing. I wasn't very athletic, and as most 14-year-old girls, struggled a lot with body image and all sorts of different, feeling comfortable in my body. And yoga was something that really intrigued me and drew me in. I started studying with an herbalist as well. I had kind of gotten into more of the natural medicine side of things on a wilderness program that my parents had sent me to. And it was really empowering, learning how to heal, learning how to help myself and help others and be comfortable in my skin. And over the last 2.5 decades of kind of really learning a lot and sharing a lot with my patients and my students, and have, really changed, I think, a lot over the years as far as, through our lifetime, we go through many different phases, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. Yoga has been such a great guide for me and so many different levels. Definitely times of stress and anxiety, for sure. Even as a yoga teacher, there's a lot of busyness in the world, I think, everywhere that you can't really get around. And so yoga's been a very powerful tool for me. So through many different times of my life, I think.
I'm glad you said that, because I think sometimes people have this perception of yoga teachers being this completely zen being for all the time, and that they just go through their day-to-day life really not experiencing any stress whatsoever. And I'm glad you kind of shared that that's not necessarily the case, that you are human like us all and susceptible to the stresses and the challenges of everyday life like everyone else.
Yeah, definitely. I think especially nowadays with everything, the growth of yoga, I don't think yoga teachers are immune from that. We have more and more, that we're doing and we're asked to do. And, as a yoga teacher, I think it becomes very similar to many other jobs in that way.
So I'm curious, from the perspective of teaching yoga and being very aware of the type of people that come into your classes, it seems that as a society we're at the all-time high for experiencing depression and anxiety. And I was wondering what you felt about what could be some of the key factors that you see as a yoga teacher who is there to bring stillness to mind and body. What is contributing to this elevated all-time high of mental and emotional and spiritual health in the society?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's similar to what I was saying just a moment ago, too, in that, I think with the modernization and the advances in technology, we're constantly pushing ourselves to the brink, much like a professional athlete would push their body to, the edge, in modern day business, and whether that's yoga or corporate, huge, large businesses, we're constantly pushing ourselves to develop more, to do more. As a person, whether you work for yourself or a company, you're constantly working off the clock, trying to go above and beyond, and the stressors just continue to climb. I think that's a big part of it. I think also, the pressures we put on ourselves, especially now with social media and this kind of never really stops of who we see ourselves as and how we kind of connect to our world. And, I also think, there's a lot that's changing in our environment, the food that we eat, the air that we breathe, the quality of everything that we consume and take in, I think is also changing. So I definitely think there's levels and layers of all of it.
Mm. We certainly don't live in a way or within an environment that we did, 60, 70, 80 years ago on so many levels. And absolutely our stresses have changed enormously. Which I guess, leads me to the question of really diving into yoga and looking at how yoga and the practice of yoga, meditation, and a breathing practice, which, we'll break down into chunks as we go through the conversation. But I guess, first of all, I'm curious as to whether or not there's any particular type of yoga that is, more beneficial to people who are suffering from either depression or anxiety, and they are very two different states of being. Whether one is in a state of anxiety and feeling very anxious versus somebody who may be quite withdrawn and in a place of depression. So, in your experience and years of teaching and, being across so many different modalities, so to speak, within yoga and practices, have you come across certain practices that lend themselves more effectively to different states of emotional being?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the person. It's such an individualized thing. And, my background is also in Chinese medicine. And in Chinese medicine, we really see different types of depression and different types of anxiety. And I think that's where we see this margin for differentiation between different styles of yoga. I definitely see students who respond to things like Bikram or Ashtanga or very, very vigorous types of yoga, and many people who really respond really well to restorative or yin. I think the biggest thing is, one of the greatest guides in our yoga practice is that of being able to listen and pay attention and to notice how your body responds. To me, yoga is kind of like an owner's manual of being able to really pay attention and be conscious of what's happening in my body and how it responds. It's one of the most helpful things I've seen in regards to working with patients, working with, yoga students versus people who are not, in that they have a little bit better idea of the owner's manual of being able to listen to their bodies and notice how they respond instead of going through what they think they should be doing or maybe what someone's told them that they should be doing. And I think really that's the key to it, of being able to really notice how your body responds. For some people, really vigorous. For some people, really mellow. I think one thing that I've seen that I think is probably the most helpful is that, simple, I think, is really key. Our lives tend to be very complex as it is. And, the complexity can be really that multidimensional strain on our nervous system as well, and our body's capacity to have to interpret and relay and transmit all of these signals. And the simplicity of the practice, to me, is one of the things that I found, especially even more so as people become more stressed, is one of the key components, whether it's a vigorous practice or a really restorative practice, a more mild, mellow practice, is really, I think another big key to it is that, our interpretation of the practice is really what makes it or breaks it. So, when we come to it and if the Ashtanga or the Bikram or the Vinyasa, this more active practice feels like an outlet, my nervous system will interpret that very differently than the people who go because they think they have to, and they kind of force themselves and they kind of push it and strain. And, our interpretation of the process of yoga is very important as well. And, that I think is really attributed to the strength and the power of the mind, which we see a lot.
So, there's a couple of things that I'm hearing you say there, and firstly, one of them is that any yoga practice that you are pursuing is one that ultimately is helping you to come back into the now, into the moment of being present in your body. And when you can facilitate that experience, then it helps to drop you out of the mind and give you a very, very different focus and tune you back into the biofeedback of the body. And when we do that through yoga, that's, one of the key ways in which we can start to calm the thoughts, slow the racing mind down, reduce the stress hormones, and all the things we know that are complementary to reducing stress. So I guess, one of the things that I wanted to ask you there is what you made so prevalent was the point of when people go to a yoga practice and they think they are going because they have to go, it's like another thing they have to tick off their list. And I see that so much, and I wonder actually how many people are conscious to the fact that perhaps it's becoming more of a stress. It's an added stress rather than an alleviation of stress because of how they're approaching it.
Yeah, and I think there's times where, we just know we have to get in there. Like I know we all have those days where it's like, oh, I don't really want to go today, but I know I'm going to feel better. And I think there's definitely a place for some of that. But it's kind of like this. I remember when I worked at Nike for a long time, and everyone had this idea like to be healthy, you have to run. And the reality is that whether we're talking about, stress levels and anxiety or metabolism, really the way that my body interprets, my reason for going is really important. Some people go to yoga to like get in there and like really be vigorous and almost beat themselves up. Like it's not a nourishing practice, which, for me, especially for anxiety and depression, is such an important part of it, or really any therapeutic practice. And so I think just kind of paying attention to the perspective, I think, with the biofeedback part of it, which is so key, the first step is really just being conscious of what the sensation of anxiety or depression is. And that can be a really scary part of it. I think that can be the hardest part of it, is actually being able to go into sometimes that darkness, that pit of darkness that can sometimes loom there, that can be the scariest part, and get familiar with, really in a yoga sense, not obviously there's the counseling side of things, which is really important, but really on a yoga side of the qualities and sensations, and really specifically where I feel it in my body, so that I can start to get in touch with, when I go and do different practices, does it enhance that? Does it heighten that? Or does it decrease that? Do I feel it in different places? And really being conscious of those sensations, which it's really easy, especially in our busy modern world, to just tune out, so that it becomes this kind of backdrop to our body, this kind of gray noise that can kind of slowly over time start to kind of wear on us and be like the nails on the chalkboard in the background of that anxiety and depression that, we can kind of stuff away, but we have to be able to establish that connection to it in order to be able to change it. We have to almost turn up the volume a little bit first, not necessarily to make the anxiety or the depression worse, but to look at the sensations that it creates in order to be able to watch really how our bodies change to different practices, and to be able to be really truthful with ourselves in that. Sometimes we really want to move, and we want to, like, especially if there's we often have this idea of like having this yoga body and getting exercise as well. If there's some attachment to that as well, it can sometimes kind of skew that ability to be really truthful with ourselves with what's actually helpful for the anxiety. And when I look at yoga therapeutically, it can serve many different roles. We all need an outlet for physical exercise, and, the therapeutic side, especially the mental side of it, might be very different. It might be, like a very specific practice in addition to, a more vigorous practice that you feel you need as a physical outlet. But that being able to have that biofeedback of really acknowledging the sensations is the key, specifically for the depression and anxiety, and being truthful with ourselves enough to be able to see how it affects that, so that, we can really see what practices will be most helpful.
In your own personal experience, would you say that, for somebody who's listening to this and then thinking to themselves, look, maybe I could, give yoga a go, as a way of dealing with what comes up, as a way as a way of relaxing the body. But as you've just said, one of the most important things is, no matter where we go or what we do, we can't run from what it is that we feel. And so even when we come to do a yoga practice, we are going to be presented at some point with those sensations. So I guess two questions in one here. The first being, are there, things that you could give to our audience as a tool to check in with themselves before they do their yoga practice, so that they can really ask themselves, is this the best thing for me to do? Is there a certain practice that's going to benefit me right now, as opposed to perhaps my usual Bikram practice that I would normally go to? Or is there a way for them to, kind of check in and really get that biofeedback so that they can choose a practice that's going to best support them where they are right now?
Yeah, I think it's just that, the simplicity of really just checking in before I do a practice, whether, I'm already there or going, it is, I think, the hardest part of taking it away. We often have this idea of what our bodies need for exercise, and really being truthful with what we need that day, and recognizing that even metabolically, our bodies function really well when they're healthy. And it's not necessarily always about doing more vigorous exercise, but by stopping long enough just to listen and look. And I think part of that is just being more familiar with the practice. And I think really the first step is becoming familiar with the sensations and the outcome of the practice, so that I can know, at the end of my day, like take a moment just to stop and go, okay, what do I actually need? Because many times in our health, we don't consider what we need. We consider what we're supposed to do, like what the magazines and the articles and the teachers and the people tell us that we're supposed to do in order to be healthy, in order to feel good, rather than, I feel exhausted today. And I think what might be more nourishing to me would be to actually slow down. It's been a busy day. My mind's racing, and to be able to find that. Or, I've been sitting at my desk all day and I really just need to move. And, once I've experienced those different types of practices, it can be easier to understand that. It's kind of hard to think about in theory. I think the first step, if people haven't done yoga, is just going out and trying classes. And, and noticing too how my perspective as I approach them, I can approach the same practice and come in one day and be like, I really need to move, and kind of come into it with this more aggressive attitude of having to kind of beat myself up a little bit, versus really approaching my practice as a form of medicine, really as a kind of a therapeutic modality, like I would take in something that was really nourishing. And so, I think it's just the simple things more than anything. I don't know that there's a specific way.
It's coming back down to that, simplicity of learning how to listen to ourselves, and trusting what our feedback is, and following through on that.
And I think as people get more familiar with the yoga practice, I think the first part is just starting and finding a beginner-friendly class where, you can start to just feel and experience and kind of be present in your body.
Talk to me about mantras, because I know that depending on who's teaching and what practice you're doing, you can often incorporate mantras into the breath work, into the yoga. How can that assist? How can a mantra in itself assist somebody to slow the mind down and sort of calm that monkey chatter down?
I think mantras are just a nice way to kind of focus the mind, to bring the mind to focus, especially when people have, a lot of really ruminating thoughts or stress. It can be one of many tools to kind of bring the mind to one point and kind of still all the busy kind of craziness that's going on. And, a good kind of affirmation as well. It's very similar to sports psychology. You're training the mind to fixate on something that's positive, really, and to fix that focal point as a way to kind of shape and shift your reality around that focal point as well, and to kind of shift where you place your awareness and your energy, which is important neurologically as well, that our brains respond to that. And, we've seen that a lot in sports psychology as well, as how much just a simple mantra, and that can be something fancy in Sanskrit or another language, which sometimes, in the traditional yoga mentality has spiritual significance. But I think, in the context that I use, I think mantras are very simple, and I think can be more meaningful when it's in a language that we understand. For English speaking people, sometimes using translations of more traditional mantras, or really any simple mantra that helps you to kind of bring your mind to kind of focus on this one thing is really important, is really helpful.
So it's another tool to help us come into the now, come into the present moment, because the body lives in the present moment. It's the mind that has this wonderful capacity to project into the future or take us back into the past. But the moment we breathe back into our body, it only knows the here and the now and the present moment. So mantras are, I'm hearing there that it, again, like Eckhart Tolle would say, the power of being in the now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
cool. So what I'm really excited about now is to learn a little bit more about what makes yoga medicine and how you have, fused together your understandings and your teachings and your master degrees that you have into creating quite a unique model of yoga and how you teach yoga, and how and why that is different to, let's say, a more traditional form of yoga that somebody might go and experience.
Yeah, so it started out when I first started seeing patients, and I was teaching yoga. I had been teaching yoga for a while, and so a lot of my patients were actually yoga students. And um, I found one day all of a sudden it kind of like a little light went off of like realizing, my yoga students really get better a lot faster than my patients who don't do yoga. Maybe I should try giving them some yoga and see if it's helpful. And so I started giving them what I called yoga prescriptions, which were just really, really short, simple, breathing exercises or yoga poses, just a couple, usually one or two, maybe three sometimes, of things that they could do on their own. And, as a healthcare practitioner, it's always been really important to me to teach my patients how to kind of take ownership and responsibility for their healthcare and give them things that they can be more proactive in. So it was a nice way to help them be proactive in their health. And, I found that they got better a lot quicker as well. So I started really kind of playing with this idea of incorporating this more regularly into, both my medical practice as well as in my teacher trainings. Training yoga teachers and really looking at how yoga teachers can obviously work one-on-one with their students more therapeutically. Our with yoga medicine, our really focus is on the fusion of Western medicine and anatomy and physiology with really the traditional practice of yoga in a way that really allows yoga teachers to work more effectively with doctors and other healthcare practitioners, and to really incorporate the practice in a way that honors both the tradition as well as what we know nowadays, what we didn't know 3,000 years ago when we were doing yoga, that we know now and we can utilize as a really important part of our treatment because we understand the disease process. And so, a lot of what I do is training teachers now of how to understand, different disease processes and different injuries or illnesses, and how to work with them more individually. And, a lot of it, when we see it, it's really interesting. A lot of what we see, I spend a lot of time really looking at research as well these days. And, what we see a lot of times is that it's the very simple things that can have the most powerful impact on our students, on our patients. And, the ability to incorporate something really regularly is probably the most important, I think, because of that neuroplasticity and the ability of the brain and the nerves to actually start to kind of repattern and reshape, how they connect and how they inform the rest of the body, which is so important. It doesn't just happen through one time, even though many of us see results with one yoga practice, that it really requires consistency in order for our neurologic system and our more global effects of the practice to take place on a more long-term scale, which I think is where a lot of the benefits of yoga come in, is really that long-term trajectory of, these chronic illnesses that we see and these more chronic diseases that we see that are so prevalent now.
Mm. I'm starting to envisage right there a kind of yoga for the brain. Just a very different approach and a different approach comes from, choosing to take a different perspective to how you would approach yoga normally, to really looking at, okay, well, as you say, how can you fuse the best of both worlds to really meet the individual where they're at. So with that in mind, I want to just talk a little bit about breath work. Is there something you can show us right now? In fact, I know that there's, and forgive me because I cannot remember the Sanskrit name for it, but there is an alternate nostril breathing exercise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nadi Shodhanam.
Say that again.
Nadi Shodhanam, yeah.
Nadi Shodhanam. Okay. Now, Can you explain a little bit about how that works and why that would be so good for balancing the brain and the emotions?
Yeah, the idea from a more traditional perspective is that it's stimulating the two sides of both the brain as well as the nervous system, that each nostril is connected to kind of one side, either the more sympathetic, more kind of what I call more of the yang side of this kind of more energetic side, the doing, the to-do lists, the kind of active participation of the brain and the body, versus the left nostril, which is more connected to this more yin or parasympathetic side, which is the rest and digest, the place where our body can do all those really important internal cellular functions of healing and repairing and detoxifying and digesting that are so important for really the internal health. And, you know, it's meant to be kind of a balancing of those two energies, both of the left and the right side of the brain, as well as really what's important with the nervous system. And we see this a lot is that, you know, we tend to get stuck in this stress mode of the sympathetic nervous system where, you know, our bodies get stuck in this fight or flight mode of our to-do lists and the busyness and the stress and the pressure and anxiety and everything that's kind of pressing at us from all these different directions. And it becomes really difficult for the body to switch into that parasympathetic mode, which might mean insomnia or trouble sleeping. It might be high blood pressure. It might be fatigue or low energy. It might be pain. It might be many different things of, you know, the body's incapacity to be able to flip from one to the other and be able to self-regulate really within that internal mechanism of the tone, or the, you know, we think of it as like a tone, like a muscle, the tone of the parasympathetic nervous system. And so I think it's a nice balancing breath to help balance that. There are different variations on that as well that can be helpful, but I think really one of the most important things in my perspective is that they find something very simple, and that with pranayama, the most important thing is really that they're able to have a sense of ease. There tends to be a point, especially as you practice more, of trying to hold the breath longer, trying to breathe deeper and longer, and that kind of pressure that we instill on making that can be part of the stress as well. And our nervous system has to be able to interpret that with a sense of ease. And so we see this in pranayama as a lot of the connection to the diaphragm. When we look at the diaphragm is our main passive muscle of respiration. And the diaphragm also has a really strong connection to the parasympathetic nervous system because of the vagus nerve that runs through it. And so, you know, just very simple what we call diaphragmatic breathing, which is where the belly is moving passively with the breath, where on the inhale, the diaphragm can pull down and we feel the belly kind of expand naturally with a sense of ease, and where the belly can then soften back down as the diaphragm moves back up into the rib cage, you know, is a very simple way of regulating the nervous system. And, you know, for most people, what's important is finding a comfortable place to do that. So oftentimes lying on the back, maybe with a pillow, maybe with something under the knees, or maybe the feet on the floor, maybe the legs propped up on a couch, however is comfortable, to find a comfortable supine position so that the neck and the shoulders and some of these accessory breathing muscles can relax. But to find a really comfortable position on their back where they can relax and feel the belly moving with the breath. And it doesn't even have to be that much longer or that much deeper than their natural breath, but there really is a sense of ease. And that's the connection really that we find of the diaphragm with that vagus nerve to stimulate the parasympathetic mode. And what most people experience with that is they'll find the heart rate slowing down, the temperature often changing, maybe the hands and feet starting to warm up. And other maybe more subtle experiences as the body's energy starts to shift more internally, and starts to kind of slowly many people experience this as an unwinding effect, especially if they've just gotten home from a very busy day. But being able to kind of slow down, and then if that's really easy, is to be able to linger in the exhale is also really important. Not that I'm pushing it or stretching it, but that I can feel that diaphragmatic breath of the belly moving naturally as I relax on my back there. And then allow myself just to linger in the exhale a little bit longer than the inhale. The exhale is where the heart rate starts to slow down, and it's where my body starts to, again, connect to this more parasympathetic mode. So, you know, if I'm counting, and I might be able to just count and notice my inhale is maybe 3 or 4 counts long, and my exhale is maybe 5 counts long. So that it's not much longer, but I'm able to I like to think of it as like leaning into the exhale, that I'm able just to linger there a little bit longer rather than prolonging it or forcing it or pushing it. That there's a point where my body can kind of lean into that as a relaxation mechanism to be able to kind of really help regulate the nervous system, which is such an integral part of anxiety and depression, that we see in the effects of just simple breathing practices.
Mm-hmm. I think, all of those things are such wonderful takeaways for the audience, because I know that breathing is number one when it comes to learning how. I mean, scientifically, it's been proven that breathing can reverse the effects of anxiety. So, just again, learning how to diaphragmatically breathe, which I notice with my own clients. Like 9 out of 10 people that I see, probably 9.5 out of 10 people that I see have a dysfunctional breathing pattern where they're secondary breathing up into the chest, and they've, been taught, perhaps from a very young age, I know I was, to always hold my tummy in, to stand tall, to walk, and almost brace the lower half of the diaphragm. And in that bracing and holding the tummy in, we start to actually elicit this stress response, because we go into the secondary breathing respiration. And, you don't realize you grow into that pattern, and you grow into that habit of breathing that way. And then it becomes really foreign to actually relax the tummy and let go and allow it to expand. And it can kind of feel like you're just sort of hanging out and allowing everything to hang out. And that's kind of a really retraining of having people realize that that's actually normal, where, it's normal and natural for the tummy to want to relax and expand as we breathe in. And I think that, if people became conscious to how they felt when they were breathing, they'd realize that they probably hold a lot of tension and a lot of contraction in the lower half of the, diaphragm.
Absolutely. And I think, that's an area we see a lot of, even, on the more scientific side of, we see the tension in the abdominals and the anatomical attachments that translates into the diaphragm, and even the fascial or connective tissue connections between the abdominals and the psoas and the transverse abdominis and all of these important muscles that, support the belly, and how that tension can directly start to influence the diaphragm. And, make it even difficult for people to tap into the diaphragm in a simple exercise like this, which does take, some time. It's a simple exercise. I wouldn't say it's easy, especially for most of us.
Absolutely. And it takes practice, as everything does, if it's to have a benefit to us. It takes some discipline and practice, but we know that it's worthwhile. Can we just clarify on the alternate nostril breathing? Is it a closing up of one side and taking a full breath in and out on the side that you're breathing in on, and then swapping over?
Yep. So it would be inhale and an inhale through one side, and then a hold, and then an exhale and an inhale through the second side, and then a hold, and then an exhale and an inhale through one side, hold, exhale, inhale, hold. And some traditions don't even do the hold. So even just, inhale, exhale, and then inhale through one side, exhale, inhale through the second side. But that it is, you'll do an exhale and an inhale through one side and then switch. So that, again, it's more of that balancing from side to side.
And as you said before, if we breathe in through the left nostril, we're activating the right-hand side of the hemisphere of the brain, which is more yin, more parasympathetic. And if we're breathing in through the right, we're stimulating the left, which is more yang, more sympathetic in nature.
Yeah, and I even think of, like, on the exhale too, of letting go of some of the negative qualities. Like, with this yang side, it can be, the positive side is it's very energizing. It's invigorating, but it also can the negative side of that can be the tension and frustration and irritability. And, the yin side is really important. We talked about for the parasympathetic and all of that nourishment that comes from, our body's capacity to heal. But also the negative side of that can also be kind of lethargy and heaviness and sluggishness sometimes as well. So I like to visualize kind of both sides of those, which I think, again, kind of like the mantras or the affirmations, can be a really important way of pointing the mind in a direction.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And bringing it again back into focus in the here and the now, where we will always find stillness. So,
And I think also the importance of that is the proactivity as well. With anxiety and depression, that can be a place where we feel really overwhelmed and out of control, and like we have no capacity to kind of manage it. And I think part of it is really kind of recognizing the sensations and noticing how simple things like these simple breathing practices can influence the sensations that we experience in our body in any moment, just by paying attention to them, even just for a minute or two, as you get more familiar with them, and to have some of that capacity to kind of notice how we can kind of steer our experience in our body based on some of these simple techniques.
Really, really powerful, really powerful. I've just got one last question, which we're asking all of our speakers to contribute, and we've actually spoken a little bit about it already, in the power of a positive affirmation. And so what we're doing as part of Healthy Me Summits for Overcoming Depression and Anxiety is actually putting together an ebook of all of our speakers' affirmations and what their I am statement would be, that they either use on a daily basis or use at some point in time, so that we can pull them all together and inspire our audience by just looking through every day and choosing a different affirmation for themselves. What would your I am statement be?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, kind of like what we began our discussion with is that, I think as a yoga teacher, we have all the stresses of being pulled in many directions. And, as a female, of the judgments of, body image and being out there in the world. And I think, probably the biggest one for me would be a really simple one. I am enough. I think there's a tendency in this world to always feel like there's something more that we have to be or we have to do. And really that modernization we talked about, and, is that pressure to keep pushing. And I think it's a healthy stress that pushes us to do more and to kind of go further, which is an important thing as human beings, but also the capacity to recognize that in any moment I am enough. I am enough in this moment, that I don't have to do those things to be enough, but that those things also push me and inspire me and stimulate me in a really healthy way too, which, stress is really just our perception of, what's going on. And so, our ability to look at those things as healthy stressors, healthy stimulus, by recognizing that, that I am enough as I am already.
I love that. And I'll let you into a little secret. I actually have I am enough written in lipstick all over the bathroom mirror.
I love that. That's great.
So I get to see it morning and night.
Nice. Good taste.
Tiffany, thank you so much for your time and all the wonderful tips and explanations you've given us around breathing. I think has been a really wonderful takeaway for our audience to go away and try and, as you say, just lie down, put a pillow underneath your head and just, feel into whatever works for you and start from that space and experiment from then onwards without it feeling like it needs to be something that's ticked off the to-do list, but just almost be like a child and be curious with it and just, have some fun with it.
I think it's also just a good side note too that, many people think about, I think within the research, a lot of what we see is the pranayama as well as the meditation. And there's kind of this stigma around meditation having to be some very specific way. But, I think what we talked about with the biofeedback is really a form of meditation, of being able to sit and notice and experience observe the qualities of the body and the mind and the breath. And, it can be a very simple practice, but I think one thing that's also really helpful for anxiety and depression is just that act of meditation, even 5 minutes a day. But again, the frequency, the regularity is what's important as a way to check in, as a way to see and notice and to keep coming back to the experience of my body so that I can, again, start to regulate by noticing the tendencies of my body. I think for me, meditation and pranayama are the two most powerful things for anxiety and depression. The meditation gives us that awareness and that ability to kind of see and look deeply and be the observer and to acknowledge the experience without judgment, without having to make it change or go away or be bad, that it's a bad thing or a wrong thing, but that it's just there and it's part of who we are as human beings to have these states. And the pranayama is really a tool of transformation, of being able to take that experience and watch how it shifts and how important it is, I think, to have the both of them. And really the importance is not in how long you do them, but doing them daily, which could just be a couple minutes a day. It could be both at the same time. It could be separately. But I think those two are probably the most powerful. And if they have a yoga practice too, great. That can be something that can be helpful. But I would say the most important is having, the regularity of the pranayama and meditation that they can do anywhere, anytime, whether they're at home or not. But it is helpful to have a set time of day. I actually have a book coming out on meditation really soon here on really meditation for weight loss and really body image in particular. But really, I think it shows the science. There's a lot of scientific research in it on the effects of the brain on the very physiological part of our bodies and our cells and our minds, and how potent that can be. Really, whether we're talking about metabolism or whether we're talking about anxiety or we're talking about body image or just feeling good in our lives, I think meditation is such a huge proponent of that. And so, I think having a regular practice of some sort within those, whether it's 2 minutes or 5 minutes or 20 minutes, is probably one of the most important things. And it's very simple as just being able to find a comfortable place to sit and notice the breath and notice, the sensations and the experience in that moment, and just be able to sit there for a few minutes and be okay with, thoughts coming and going and whatever comes up, whether your back's hurting or you're thinking about your to-do list, your breath is deep or choppy, just to be able to sit and notice and check in. There's a lot of variations on meditation that can be fancy and helpful and go deeper potentially, but that's kind of a really important starting point, I think.
Mm. And I think your point there also of just making sure that you're comfortable when you do it. I think, one of the things you said right at the very beginning, there's so many different shoulds and shouldn'ts when it comes to doing meditation. And I think the most important thing, I'm this person, I cannot sit on the floor and meditate with crossed legs. That's just not for me. I need to be comfortable in a chair, upright, with my spine straight but supported, and that's what works for me. But if I'm forced to go, into a position that doesn't feel comfortable to me, I won't stay there. Whereas if I find something that is comfortable but that keeps me kind of conscious and present, then I will do that. And I think that's really important for some people, because they can be pushed into an experience of meditation which for their first time isn't a pleasant one, and then of course they don't want to go back.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really key. Yeah, I first learned meditation and had a very strict way kind of pushed on me, and I kind of came away from it for several years before I came back to find it, and have really developed such an important relationship with my meditation practice that's been really important. And I think is important to recognize the effects of meditation, not just on our minds. We think of this for stress and anxiety and productivity, but that it really does have a very powerful physiological effect on the body as a whole, on a cellular level, which is, so important for really our vitality and health and all sorts of things, our mindset as well. And so it can be very simple. It's nice that it doesn't have to be very fancy, but that, it does have to be something that you can be comfortable with.
Exactly. Accessible for everybody. Mm.
Yeah.
Tiffany, thank you so much for your time and all the wonderful explanations and knowledge that you've shared with us. There's been some great tools and great takeaways for our audience. So we really, really appreciate that. We look forward to your book coming out, and hope that we connect again in the future.
Great. Thanks for having me. It was nice to chat.
You're very welcome. Very welcome. Thank you.